We have a post-process material that renders outlines in a color that we choose on our level's polygons and normals. Now we'll add some controls to affect their thickness, contrast, and quality. By the end of this module, we'll implement a complete outline post-process material that will render on our entire level. So now let's address the flickering that we're seeing on our image due to our polygon lines. If I swing around and I take a look at the back wall, as I move, I can see there's some flickering that's going on. In order to see this better, if I go to the Lit button and I browse down to the Lighting Only, I'm now looking at just the lines on our polygons and nothing else, when we can clearly see through this visualization what's going on here. We have several little lines that are being drawn on the insides of all of the polygon faces. So let's address this now. Let's go back into our material. And after our polygon outline code, let's add a multiply. So if I hold M and left click, and I multiply the result of all of the polygons by a constant float, if I hold 1 and left click, I can determine how much of the effect will render on the screen. In order to see this effect in real time, we can parameterize this constant. If I right-click and I select Convert to Parameter, after I save this material, I can now adjust this value and see the effect in real time without needing to recompile the shader. So let's call this Polygon Outline Amount. Let's take the result of the multiply and plug it into the Add node that's combining our normal lines with our polygon lines. Let's set the default value to 1. And now let's hit save. And we'll see there's no effect on the scene. If I take this value and I begin to increase it, I can see that more lines are being drawn on the insides of the faces, which is actually the opposite of what we want. So now let's drag this value back down until we start to get primarily lines on just the outside edges. Let's set it to 0.2. And now when we look around, we see there's significantly less flickering that's happening, but it's still happening. And we need to do a second operation to completely get rid of it. The second operation is going to be introducing contrast to this new amount of lines to further clean it up. And the way we're going to introduce this contrast is through a power node. So if we right click and we type power under math, we'll see it's the only option. Now a power node is an exponential operation. It's going to take a base amount and multiply it to the exponent. Let's copy our polygon outline amount parameter and paste it here. And let's change the name to polygon outline contrast. Now the reason a power node is perfect for a contrast operation is because of the way the math works. Whatever the values are being put into the base, the exponent is going to determine how much of the base gets darker and how much of it gets brighter. Essentially, the dark values will get darker and the bright values will get brighter based on how much the exponent is. So let's plug this in and let's plug the result into the add so that now we have both of these lines of code affecting how our polygon lines look. Let's set the default of our new parameter, polygon outline contrast, to 1, and now let's hit save. After I've reduced the amount of lines drawn, I can increase the contrast of the lines that are being drawn. So if I set this to something like 5, and now I look around, I can see that the flickering is gone. So now let's go back to our characters. Let's exit lighting only and go back to lit. We look around again, we can see that lines are being cleanly drawn with no flickering. Before we adjust our polygon outline, let's add a comment box to this shader code by selecting it and hitting C. And let's call this polygon outline quality controls. So now if I take this shader code and I copy it and I paste it in front of my normal lines, and I take the first parameter, polygon outline amount, and I change the name to normal line amount, and then I change the second parameter node to normal line contrast, and then I take the desaturation, plug this into the multiply. I'm going to go to full screen in my material so we can see a bit better what we're doing. And instead of plugging the desaturation into the add that combines the two lines of code, I'm going to take the power and plug this in so that now I can control how the normal lines render with these controls. So now when I hit save, I can increase the amount of lines being drawn on my normals as seen in the image. Let's set it to 5 just to increase it a bit. And then I can, just like I did on my polygons, increase or decrease the contrast of these lines as well. Let's set this to 5 and hit save. So now I can see I have clean lines that are rendering on both the polygons and the normals. Let's go back to our lighting only and let's take a look again. Now let's create a parameter that will control the thickness of our outline effect. So back in our material, let's go to full frame. If I select and copy one of the parameters that I've just created and rename it to polygon outline thickness, I will now be able to use this parameter to drive how far our offset is when we look up our G-buffer. Currently, we've set our two vectors to move our G-buffers 1 pixel in their respective directions to create the lines on the top, bottom, and sides of our polygon and normal. If we multiply that effect by our newly created parameter, we can, with this one parameter, affect how many pixels this 2 vector will offset our scene depth and world normal information. So let's plug this multiply into this add and repeat the process for each one of our lines. We'll need to do this 4 times. Let's create some reroute nodes to organize these lines a little bit better. Let's set the default value to 1, which is going to multiply all of these 2 vectors by 1, which should indicate no change visually. So let's save and take a look. So now, if I change this to 2, right away I can see the thickness increase on the polygons. 3, 4, 5. You can set this to anything you want. Just like with everything else, it's an aesthetic preference, and use it to your heart's content. Let's set this to 2 to get a little bit more of a pronounced polygon outline effect, and then save the material. Let's do exactly the same thing for the normal lines. Let's copy our newly created code, all of the multiplies that we added, and let's paste it down here next to our normal line shader code. Let's rename our parameter normal line thickness, and then let's plug everything in the exact same way. Now let's organize where this is a little closer, and let's set the default value to 1. Bring this down so we can see the effect, and let's hit save. Now, if I take this value to 2, I can see the same effect happening on the normals. Let's set it to 1. With the controls built in this module, we can determine our outline's thickness, amount, contrast, and overall quality. We've now created and implemented a post-process material that renders outlines on our entire level. In the following course modules, we'll examine how to render post-process materials, including outlines, on selective parts of our level.